I can't remember a time where my faith wasn't important to me, but like most people, there are times where my faith became real. I was involved in a youth group when I was in high school. That I mean, we just had some wild stuff go on. This was in the early '70s, and we had some occult kind of things that were in the community that were pressing against it. And so it just became super real. But when I was going off to school, I was trying to decide whether I would go into ministry or what. I didn't really have a direction. And I was convinced that I wasn't the right person to be a pastor. I kind of self-described myself as somebody who at that point lacked kind of the gift of mercy and didn't seem like a good fit for being a pastor. And so I went to school and got a degree in math, which, not even in the business side of things. And as I graduated, I went into business and frankly, my faith was important then. I volunteered as a youth worker. I did other things, but it was really two very separate worlds. It was, Monday through, Friday or Saturday working, and then some stuff on the weekend with church, and it was very divided. And frankly, I ended up being pretty successful in business and worked my way up into a company where at the end I was the CEO of this pharmaceutical technology company, flying all over the world in a private jet, all the things that you think you'd want to have in business. And because of that, the Sunday things really diminished, family time really diminished. And it was at that point where I literally had this moment where I knew God was calling me out of that. And I can't describe it other than I knew. My wife, I came home and I said, I think I need to do something different. She said, I feel the same way. And it was at that point, where these two worlds had to collide. And like I said, I can't describe it other than I just knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I needed to do something completely different.
Hey, Brad, could I try to describe that to see if you agree?
Sure.
When I was younger, I can't tell you how many books I read on hearing God's voice. How do you hear God's voice? How do people, God told me this and that. And then I come to enjoy the term led. I thought that just seems more accurate to me.
Right.
But I also think in what you're talking about is when we talk about hearing God's voice, we think of it in our own physical terms of a structured sentence with words in a grammatical way that convey a message, where it seems to me when the Holy Spirit often speaks to people, I hate to use the word telepathy, but it seems to be you're just downloaded knowledge.
Right.
That's you're exactly just suddenly know something beyond your own capacity. In your case, it was probably wisdom and direction. Sometimes it seems to be just from beginning to end information you didn't know before that is crystal clear and you're 100% about it.
That's exactly it. And I do describe that time as God speaking to me in that way, but it's not an audible voice. It's not like, the clouds open, but it was as clear as that to me and to my wife at the time. And what's so funny about that is so then, I ended up leaving and I took this job and it didn't seem quite the right job, but it was working at this, helping churches finance their church buildings and everything. But it was kind of the setup to what I was really then called to do. And what was so funny is they brought me in, I interviewed, and I said, well, because what the job was then to move. We had just moved into the house that we thought we were going to retire in. We loved our neighborhood. We loved our friends. Everything was great. And again, it was the second time I just felt like, you're going to have to move. You're going to have to give up all of this stuff. You're going to go from, you're going to take a giant pay cut. You're going to move. I'm moving you out of your comfort into this other thing. And through that interview, I remember it was so funny because I went to the interview and I came back home and I said, well, Sue, don't worry. The interview went horrible. There's no way I'm going to get this job. We're safe. We're not moving. And I remember saying, no, we're moving, and didn't hear anything for almost 3 months. And all of a sudden we're packing up our house and off we go. So it is that sense of voice calling, whatever you want to call it, where you only have, at that point, you have two choices. You can either obey or you can try to run away. And the running away part doesn't seem like an option or a very good option at that point.
Yeah. And I think it's so clear at times that the only time you question it is just later. It's after the fact, and it's your own questioning, because usually it seems like something you wouldn't have chosen yourself or thought of.
Right.
Or makes rational sense.
And what's so funny is I thought exactly, and I thought I was walking away from, this, being in business, being, the company I was the CEO of was it was a huge company, but it was a pretty big company. And it was, and I ended up taking this giant pay cut and moving out from our comfort zone and, packing up with our kids and moving to St. Louis and working at a church where it wasn't kind of in my sweet spot, thinking that I'd given up everything. And yet, and that's when that voice kind of came in and said, was it real? Did you really feel that way? And then now, 30 years later, I can see it was a path that laid out, because through that process, I ended up becoming, if I hadn't have done that, there's no way I would have become the CEO of a Fortune 500 company and, all the rest that played out after that. So, and yet if I wouldn't have obeyed, my guess is I would have burned out at where I was. Family would have fallen apart, for a whole bunch of other reasons. That world between Sunday and Monday was getting too separate. This brought them back together in a really, really powerful and helpful way for me.
Yeah. And so, as you would know, those terms can be like dividing we have like a sacred part of our lives and a secular part of our lives. And when I was growing up, and the Christian music industry was booming or beginning to spawn, I guess, and becoming popular, there was secular music. Then there was kind of the sacred. So it was always divided. I've come to think that even if you're not in a company where you can do your business skills in a faith environment, you're still, if you divide that separate and sacred, or what did I just say it wrong? Sacred and secular in your life or in your mind or the way you live, you're still doing yourself and the world injustice. You can still not have that division there and just be who you are and follow that voice or the calling on your life, no matter where it is.
Absolutely. And that's the whole point is I had started to divide it, and through that calling process, it was slammed back together. I don't actually think they are supposed to be divided. I don't think there is a separation. Mm-hmm. In fact, I remember speaking to, a church when I was working at this church denomination, they really had this separate, and as a business person, they were kind of always putting me into the secular side of things. And I remember saying to, one of the people there, I said, there's truth. We believe there's absolute truth. That doesn't mean there's business truth and church truth. There's just truth. And, and when you find the truth, it's really clear there is no divide there. And so to me, that was that moment of kind of reconciling that part of my life was part of that call. And so now there's no divide. And in fact, it's this whole process of finding how to not divide those two things has really been the journey of really my life since then, on helping people find, and kind of the careers I had, helping people find that those two things go together. And that's where joy comes from. That's where the full life comes from. It's not trying to divide those things, but bringing them together where there's real truth and joy.
Yeah. I mean, Brad, imagine a world where that was the norm, that it wasn't divided. You almost became or went into ministry to be a pastor. That wasn't your calling, because you and I grew up in a mindset of sacred and separate. And if you want to do the right thing, well, I'm going to do sacred work.
Right.
Not thinking business is sacred.
Right.
And then you're in a position or a pulpit that you were never called to. And I think that's the position in so many places, or people are doing ministry they weren't called to, and they should be in business doing ministry or through business that they were called to, and and so on.
Right. And again, to me, that was the story of kind of my journey through kind of dividing, bringing them back together, and then seeing how that everything is a way to bring God's truth into life, and that there's a role for pastors, there's a role for business people, there's a role for everyone. In fact, I remember doing a conference with at that time the CEO of Best Buy and I were asked to speak at the seminary on bringing, how does faith show up at work, and we were talking about that, and the person who led the devotion just before us did a study on kind of the origin of work and how God brings work as a sacred thing, and kind of bringing that point home, and talking about how, in some ways the word for work and worship are the same thing. And so as we think about our work being our worship, it transforms that sense of who we are from, I got to earn a living and now I'm going to do my religious stuff, to I'm going to spend my life in worship through whatever I do.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting, when you get that mindset, the scriptures kind of open up that it was always there.
Right.
Like serve your bosses basically as you would the Lord, and all these, it's all over the place.
It's all over the place. And again, for me, this kind of, it was this, I would describe it as kind of miraculous kind of forcing this calling, this voice from God, this clear intention of bringing them together. And I am super thankful for that, because again, my sense of my life would have been bringing them apart. And kind of what's so funny is in my life, the part that I was probably struggling with the most in my life and my walk with God and everything was, learning to be generous. And I end up being the CEO of a company where one of our whole points of distinction was helping people live generously. And so, I mean, kind of the humor, the irony of God is like you needed to kind of bring me through this process to bring me to a point where I could see it was him and not me that was needed
Right.
for even the work I was doing.
Yeah. And for those listening, and this is possibly like an epiphany moment, like, they're living for their, when they have a Wednesday night church or a Sunday church, but they're getting through their work week and they just enjoy the church environment. How did you incorporate, or do you incorporate that mindset in the work hours of the day? I mean, is it before you go, a little like prayer to work, or what would you say? We kind of got on a topic here of hearing God's voice, maybe in dramatic ways at big life moments, but what about on a daily basis with the responsibility of managing or running a company?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, this was probably the value of some of the growing up practices, because while that was a very clear moment, a big moment of kind of hearing God's voice, I think that's the practice that you need to incorporate to keep the sacred and secular combined, is how do you do that every day in a super practical way. So for me, when I at first, I'd try to do get up really early and do some sort of little devotion and then go off, and that always felt exactly like the divide of Sunday and Monday. It's like it was just in the day, so I'd do it and then I would go like to work. And so what I learned was that wasn't the answer. The answer was to try to incorporate it within everything that I was doing. I mean, so I would get to work, and I would try to get there early enough so that I would have what I would call just a kind of a mini time of Sabbath where I'd just be quiet and think, just a time where I wasn't doing any work, just kind of think about the people, especially in what was happening during that day, spend some time in prayer, but honestly more just to be quiet and a lot of people would talk about it as meditation. I think it was just being open to hearing and settling with where God was going to lead me that day. And then during the day, for me, it was always thinking about how with each activity, especially, you've been in business too, Ken, long enough to know it's, so much of it is people, relationships, and interactions, and really lifting up that idea of how do we take whatever we're doing and help whatever that person or that circumstance bring glory to, and help that person see the best in themselves, and through that process it became much easier to incorporate and hear God's voice through all of that process. So it wasn't like doing this and then doing that. It was like they were blended together. It was and Paul talks about praying, continually. It was almost like combining secular and sacred continually in everything you do.
That was exactly what I was going to say to you next. It was on my mind while you were talking. I was going to say, how could you separate secular and sacred when we are supposed to pray without ceasing? It'd be impossible.
Right. Yeah, and so that became the practice, and it isn't like I did it perfectly. It wasn't like you get into these stressful situations and anybody falls, but the better you get at not trying to, and for me at least, the better I got at not dividing those things, but incorporating those things. And again, it still goes back to that kind of that voice, the voice of God that helped me through that. But it became, I didn't need that anymore because I was getting it every day, and it was really clear, and you could see it in every action and every person, and it really. I said I didn't have much mercy. I self-described myself as having a lot of empathy, but no compassion, meaning I understood how you felt. I just didn't care. I really think that was the transformation in my life, as I went from being, I would say, pretty uncompassionate to having the empathy and compassion to really help people succeed and to grow and to learn how to step into what God had created them to be.
Very good. Well, I appreciate your time. I think this is a great conversation, and best you in your future ventures. It sure doesn't sound like you're quote retired. It sounds like you're just moving on to other things.
Actually, I'm coming up to interview to be the and I'm not sure I'm not sure how or why this turned out. It's like many things, but it would be the kind of in the association of ministries that help people kind of their very bottom, the union gospel missions, those kinds of homeless shelters, and it's kind of the irony of somebody who didn't think they should go into pastor because they lack compassion, going into probably a role that of some sort that where you need that more than anything.
Right. When I feel like I've heard God's voice or a leading, however you want it, sometimes it's clear, 100%. Sometimes, it's you're trying to work it out. What's in your head and what's not, which direction you should go or job you should take, whatever. I always try to think, where I feel like I can be led, does this benefit me? And if I find out it doesn't, and it's only benefiting other people, I'm probably hearing God's voice. Or is it stepping me out of my comfort zone to help other people?
Those are great tests, because that is what I found is that those are the places where, again, you step out and you find real joy in that, because you didn't do it for you.
Right. All right. Well, thank you, Brad.
Thanks, Ken. It was fun catching up again.
Yep. Ditto.